Donc, je vous présente Glenn. Il va s'introduire lui-même. Évidemment, la deuxième partie va se faire en anglais, mais on peut prendre les questions en français en tout temps. Merci. Glenn.
My name is Glenn. I have sales responsibility for Voitech, and I'm joined by Barry Watkinson. Barry's a senior business consultant with us and helps on the technical pre-sales side. Between us, we've been doing this for quite some time. We have over 100 customers that we've done together over the years. That ranges anywhere from, I think, our smallest user, who has four concurrent users, up to our biggest customer that has over 9,000, and kind of everything in between. Very comfortable with a lot of different host systems. We've integrated voice to probably over 80 different host systems. That ranges from your large ERPs like SAP and Oracle, all the way down to your smallest homegrown systems. And everything in between. So, we're going to talk about some things today, really more of an education session for you. And to that end, who in the room has used voice or is using voice today? Who's familiar with voice from videos, maybe on YouTube or seen it at trade shows? Those people. So there's a few different company names involved with voice. You may have heard of some of these names. HighJump Voice, which is actually a trademark name that we go to market with. Voitech, Kerber, Honeywell, Vocalect, or Honeywell or Vocalect. And so just to explain a little bit about who these different companies are, I'm going to start with the one that wasn't up there, and that's a company by the name of Voitech. And Barry and I are former Voitech employees. Voitech was a company that partnered with HighJump deploying their large WMS warehouse advantage. Also had a voice practice as well. And we did that in partnership with HighJump for many, many years. About 2 years ago, HighJump acquired Voitech, and shortly thereafter, a German company named Kerber acquired HighJump. More recently, Kerber acquired Voitech. I'm not done with the companies that begin with V yet. There's more to come. Voitech had the largest voice practice with Honeywell in North America. Voitech had the largest voice practice with Honeywell in Europe. And so Kerber had this idea, well, we've got this large voice group in North America, this large voice group in Europe. Why don't we put them together? And so that's what's happened. We are now going by the brand named Voitech, but you also may know us as HighJump Voice. Same people, same developers, same project managers, different business cards. Collectively now, we are the largest voice integrator in the world. We have over 1,300 implementations, over 50,000 daily users. 135 people come to work every day doing nothing but voice. And we've built a pretty sizable business on the order of about $50 million annually now. So deep product knowledge when it comes to voice. Again, this is all that we do all day, every day. And we do it in different ways. Voice picking is what we're here to talk about primarily today, but we also do voice for other things in manufacturing. We do voice for maintenance or inspections. We have customers that are doing this for fleet maintenance, so think of doing preventive maintenance on vehicles. We have people that are doing it in manufacturing. The largest manufacturer of doors and windows in the world uses voice to help on a custom door line, delivering instruction assemblies to their employees there. So a lot of different applications that we get involved with. In terms of HighJump only, pretty large install base there as well. Some names you may recognize. I heard Jean Coutu mentioned a little bit earlier, and we do voice for them. We do that in multiple languages, and so you can get that in both English and French at Jean Coutu. And I mentioned Kerber. So the parent company to us has 7 different divisions. We do fall into the list of many automation companies. And so Kerber's put together a portfolio doing not only the software end of things, but also automation so that they can truly serve the distribution market from material handling all the way to software. The last company I'm going to mention is Honeywell Vocalect, and we partner with Honeywell Vocalect in our voice offering. Honeywell or Vocalect, again, use the name interchangeably, is the largest voice provider in distribution centers in the world. Vocalect has about a 70% market share globally, Part of how they got that kind of market share was through partnering with companies like us who go out into the real world and hook this up to all kinds of different host systems. Specifically, HighJump is what we've done that quite a bit with. We are the largest partner in the world to Vocalect and collaborate with them on a lot of different offerings, go-to-market type things, including an Android offering that I'll talk about in a little bit. Voice may be a little bit new to you. Honeywell Vocalect has been doing this for over 25 years. And again, have built up a pretty sizable business themselves. A lot of patents around their technology, both on the hardware side. They have things like mobile devices that they have or very unique headsets that they have built specifically for industrial voice. Also, the speech recognizer is built specifically for loud industrial environments. And again, a lot of patents around that as well. So first thing, we should probably define what voice is. This was something I didn't have to do years ago, but when we hear voice today, we tend to think of things that affect our everyday life. Amazon Alexa, as an example. The GPS in your car, Siri on my iPhone. Voice means different things to people today than it did even 5 years ago. And so the way that we define voice is this. It's voice-directed work through the use of structured dialogue. Structured dialogue is very important here. This is not free-form speech. We are directing people what to do, where to go in a warehouse, for example, and confirming that we have them in a particular location, telling them to pick a certain product or to go do something. But it's a very directed and structured workflow. And we want to do that very specifically for a given workflow. And so from our perspective, this is an ROI-driven sale. We want to say, does this make sense to do? Can we build a gold path on the workflow that makes sense for everybody, and then design the exceptions to deviate from that if needed? And so that's how we define voice. Again, these are the things when I said voice that you may have thought of. We will continue to see more of that, obviously, in our daily lives. We are also beginning to incorporate some of that into what we do. And so we refer to this as conversational voice. But there's some big differences between this technology and what we do. If you think about saying something to Google or to Alexa, if it doesn't understand you the first time, that's typically okay. Your expectation probably is it won't understand you the first time. So you're going to have to repeat yourself. And with conversational voice, when you're asking a question, that's okay. We've all come to expect that. When we're doing transactional voice, which is what we refer to with a structured dialogue, that's not acceptable. If you think about what we're doing as far as picking in a warehouse, it's not uncommon for there to be a couple thousand interactions per shift between the employee and the voice system. And if we have the same recognition as some of those consumer type applications, it's going to be the kiss of death. You're going to have a very frustrated worker who's going to have to repeat themselves over and over and over. And so from our perspective, we need recognition to be extremely high. We need recognition response to be extremely fast. We don't have the luxury of sitting there and allowing some processing to go on in the background when the voice system is trying to figure out what the picker said. It needs to be an immediate response, just like having a conversation. So from our perspective, we typically live in a response time of inside 200 milliseconds. If we get over half a second, it tends to get a little bit uncomfortable. What's interesting about voice in comparison to RF is, and you may notice this with your workers who use RF, they tend to be very comfortable staring at a spinning hourglass. Bill Gates taught us that that was okay to do that. And so we will sit there and we will watch an hourglass spin and we won't get very frustrated. But we've all been taught since birth that if somebody says, or you say something to somebody and they don't respond immediately, that's perceived as rude. And typically over a half-second delay will start to get you a little bit on edge. And so we need very fast response time with voice. And so what we refer to as transactional voice does that. All of the speech recognition is done on the device. And so we are not having any latency issues. I'll talk a little bit about that. So timeliness and accuracy are paramount to what we do. If we don't nail that, we're going to have a very frustrated worker and you'll have a revolt on your hands. Fortunately, the core technology that we have from Vocalect is proven. There's over 1 million daily users using that technology globally now, and it's very well vetted, works very, very well. So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we have in terms of voice recognition. If you think about what Siri on your iPhone or again Alexa is doing, it's trying to figure out what language you're speaking in, the dialect that you're speaking it in, the inflection in your voice, because as human beings we all speak with inflections, right? Right? It's then from that trying to figure out what's the meaning of what you just said. Meaning can have a lot of different connotations, particularly in English. We have a lot of idioms. There's a lot of sayings in English that may not translate very well. If I say, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse, doesn't necessarily mean I want to eat a horse. It's just one of the odd expressions we have in the English language. So a speech recognition system needs to figure out what's the context or meaning behind what it is that I'm saying. And then on top of all that, it has to handle the background noise of what's going on behind me. You think about the unique challenges in a warehouse, the forklift that drives by and beeps. The shrink wrap, when you cut open shrink wrap, it sounds remarkably like the letter S to a speech recognition system. A lot of challenges, pallets dropping on the floor, etc. And so those sudden bursts of noise, we call those insertions, are very challenging for a speech recognition system. So some considerations when designing the speech recognition system is, do I want it to be speaker dependent or independent? And that will affect the speech. Meaning, do I want the system to listen to the entire universe of language, dialect, inflections? Or do I want it to listen to one voice and one voice only? Do I want that vocabulary to be free-form speech of saying whatever you want? Or do I want that vocabulary to be predefined so that the voice system already knows what those words mean? And do I want to build a recognizer made for the general population, or do I want to use a speech recognizer built for a very specific purpose in the warehouse? And the technology choices that we use from Vocalect are primarily built around these things here. They're speaker dependent, meaning that when you use our voice system, the system is only listening for one voice and one voice only on that device, and that's the person using it. It's listening for a very limited vocabulary, typically in a picking process, only about 60 to 90 words. You can say any word you want, it's only going to recognize about 60 to 90 of them. That's going to include your numbers, 0 to 9. So if it tells me to pick 12, my response is 1, 2. That's how I say 12 in the voice picking world. There's going to be certain command phrases, simple phrases of how much more, or say again, or location, or description. Very basic words that I can say to the system to then have it speak back to me whatever that command happens to be. Again, collectively about 60 to 90. So that's how we define voice. Let's talk a little bit about how it actually works. So on one side you have your host system. And data is sent to a voice device. That voice device can be one of many different ones. This one is built by Honeywell Vocalect, and it happens to be the most popular device for picking in a distribution center in the world. You'll notice there's no screen, there's no keyboard. Often this is worn on a hip, or if you have material handling equipment, it's mounted perhaps in the cup holder. Fits very, very well in the cup holder. This one actually has a scanner built into it, which we can activate by voice by simply giving a command scan. But there's a wireless transmission that happens from your host system, from your WMS, that sends a small little data packet over your wireless network. It runs on a standard 802.11 wireless network in your warehouse. That small little data packet hits this device, and it then converts on the device that to speech, which tells you to do something. Go to this location, or maybe drop off a pallet, whatever that instruction happens to be. You then confirm back verbally, or you can confirm back in another way, such as scanning. And so we have people who will combine voice, they will combine scanning. Scanning is not a bad word to us. We do use that quite often in the voice world. Simply it's data entry from our perspective. And so if you're picking, for example, and you are verifying at the point of pick a lot code, and I talked to some people at lunch about this, if you're verifying that lot code, and let's say it's a 15, 20-digit lot code, chances are you don't want to speak that. It's going to be much faster to scan it. And so you can scan that at that point in time, and we'll prompt you verbally, but your response is going to be to take a scan. So we can mix scanning and voice together where it makes the most sense. That response, should it be verbal, is converted back into data on the device. And then a small little data packet goes out over your wireless network that then updates the host system. And so the take-home information is this is not voice over IP. Oftentimes with companies, when we talk about voice, particularly with their network engineers, the hair on the back of their neck stands up a little bit, because to a network engineer, voice means a lot of bandwidth. It means it's going to hog our wireless network, and that's not the case here. The data packets for voice are very similar to what you use for RF today. So let's talk about some common applications. Again, we've done ourselves a little bit injustice by referring to voice picking as voice picking. Certainly it was the first application in the distribution center, and there's a lot of people doing it, but it's not the only thing that we do with voice. Good application for voice is where I have a critical amount of people doing the same workflow throughout the course of a day. And typically historically that threshold has been set at about 10 to 12 people. That's come down over time though. And so you see some things here that we've done with voice, literally everything from receiving to truck loading and everything in between that goes on in the four walls of the DC. So that's going to include things like put away, replenishment, cycle counting. There's a consolidation that we've done, every form of picking imaginable. I think I heard a little bit earlier, cluster picking and e-fulfillment are things that we've certainly done in the Edge world that's standard there. Different types of inspection processes, quality type of inspections. And so virtually anything that goes on inside those four walls, again, as long as we have a critical amount of mass of people doing it to drive the ROI behind it. At this point, I'm going to play about a 5-minute video. This is an Edge user down in Atlanta, Georgia, Huddle House. For those of you who might travel to the southern U.S. and you want some really good fatty food, Huddle House is the place to go for southern comfort food. And so they deployed Edge, I guess it's been a couple of years ago now. They were actually picking with RF prior to that, and so they'll talk a little bit about their experience of picking with RF versus voice and the transition. So bear with me for about 5 minutes. We'll go through this video.
Huddle House is a self-distributed restaurant chain. We have roughly 350 locations throughout 23 states. When you think of Huddle House, you think of this restaurant chain, but distribution is the other half of our business. We have one distribution facility for the entire country here in Atlanta. We distribute out of 70,000 square feet. We ship out of 3 different temperature environments. We have an ambient environment. We have what we call our cooler, and we have our freezer. We ship roughly 60,000 pieces per week, and we distribute roughly 650 SKUs. Literally everything that our restaurants need to operate, meats, produce, dry goods, supplies, all come directly from us. We implemented HighJump Warehouse Edge back in 2014, and at that time, we implemented an RF scan-based pick fulfillment technology. Voitech found me as the partner for HighJump Warehouse Edge. I was a big proponent of Vocollect, and the fact that Voitech was a Vocollect partner. Voitech just checked all the boxes. They just got it. They'd done plenty of implementation. They partnered with our existing WMS. It was absolutely the right fit. We came to the conclusion that it was just inescapable. Voice was the way to go for our operation. So we got approval in late 2016. We got the project kicked off and rolling in a matter of days. From an implementation standpoint, from Wojtek, the two gentlemen that were here to do the implementation were fantastic. They absolutely understood the product in and out, not just from a user perspective, but from a database perspective. So the implementation and the execution of integrating it into WMS was seamless. And what was interesting to me is the flexibility of voice. So I could actually implement a user at a time onto voice. So the people on the floor loved it. And my impression was we just gave our people the absolute best tool we could possibly give them. We had a couple of guys who were struggling with the RF technology. And we said, we're going to start with you first. And these were guys who were, there were two guys in particular who were right on the edge. We didn't know if we were going to be able to keep them. We didn't know if they were going to make it. Voice made them excellent selectors. We started with them. We implemented immediately with those guys. We trained them literally for an hour, and they got it. After we trained the first guy or two, that first selector or two will convert immediately. And all the other guys who were still wearing the big RF and the scanning were seeing these guys who were inferior selectors to them yesterday, keeping pace with them and even surpassing them. And everybody was like, when's it my turn? When's it my turn? When do I get to go? So there was an enthusiasm for it.
Definitely made my guys better. It made them faster, they're more precise, picking the orders, so less errors, less money we have to spend on FedEx. It's great.
I like the speed. I like the fact that you can go fast. It cuts down the mispicks, so that's all I care about.
We were fully live a month and a half before the original projection because it was that easy to train and assimilate. I cannot stress enough how easy this implementation was. The benefits to voice were very clearly full hands-free, range of motion, no impediment. The accuracy of having someone speak to you and tell you what to do. I have found that our eyes lie to us significantly more than our ears. And that's really what it was. The speed and the accuracy of voice was just far superior to reading a screen and scanning with RF. From an accuracy perspective, when we went live with the traditional check digit methodology, and we found, because of our small SKU size, that it was way too easy for our selectors and warehouse personnel to memorize, and we were having issues of them calling it without being there. So we actually paired ring scanning with voice so that they would have to physically be in front of the position to make the pick. And what we found when we did that almost immediately is our error rate got cut in half. We went from roughly 1 in 1,400 cases having an error to 1 in almost 3,000 cases. For anyone considering implementing voice, I would say, don't wait. Do it now. You'll reap every benefit that you expect and more beyond this. And what's equally as important as the technology you choose is the implementation partner that you choose. And I literally would not integrate another system without Wojtek. They're tremendous. I would say do it now, run, sign the papers, get it done, make it happen.
So that's a bit of a shameless plug for us. There are a few take-home pieces of information there. First off, how quick the rollout was. I think Nathan said during that that it was about a month and a half sooner than projected. He actually wanted to go live during the setup and training trip. We have an implementation methodology I'll talk about here in a little bit, but we were there for a few days to set up and train their people, and it went so smoothly. He said, let's just go live right now. The other thing is he talked about the ease of use or the changes that go along with it. And we had some discussion early on with him about the use of check digits. Check digits simply being a label, physical label on a location that associates what looks to be a random number to that location. And they only have about 650 SKUs total. There's 40 that are really high volume movers. And as we talked to him about these check digits, we have some tricks that we can use to prevent people from memorizing. And that includes having multiple check digits there, and he chose not to do that initially. People did start to memorize some things, and so then he decided that he wanted to use a ring scanner, as he mentioned. talked about, from our perspective, voice or scanning can be used interchangeably. And so he kind of called me one day, we talked about it. He said, get me a demo ring scanner. A few days later, he was evaluating it and then moved over to it. So in terms of changing the process, changing that pick flow, I do want to set the expectation that that can be done relatively easily. So let's just talk momentarily a little bit about why do this in the first place. I mean, we think it's a cool technology, but I don't think anyone has ever implemented it just because of that. And there's got to be a business driver behind this, and where's the ROI? And the ROI comes primarily from two big things. First thing is productivity. I think most people understand that if I can take an RF device out of somebody's hands, make them hands-free, I'm probably going to be a little bit faster, a little bit more productive. That's pretty intuitive to most people. But the other part of this I don't think we talk enough about, and that is process redesign. We don't intend to just take voice and lay it on top of what you're doing today. I think if we do that, we're doing you an injustice. It's really an opportunity to, again, design from the ground up and build the most voice-optimized process we can. When we've done some studies to see how much of the productivity gain do we get from hands-free versus process redesign, in most cases, the process redesign will overweigh the hands-free portion of it. The second thing that we usually get in terms of ROI is accuracy. And so a little counterintuitive that voice would be more accurate than scanning. But I think we've all experienced when you have a person on the other hand of that RF scanner, they might do everything correctly in terms of scanning, but they might execute wrong. So they might go to location, scan the location correctly, look at the RF device for what do I do next, and then when they look back up, their hand goes top, bottom, left, or right of where it was supposed to go to pick the product. So they executed the scan perfectly, they performed the pick wrong. And what we see with voice is that we're just giving you one step. We're allowing you to always focus with your eyes on the task at hand, and you are verbally confirming what you're doing as you're doing it, and studies show that if you verbalize what you're doing, you tend to be more accurate. One of the reasons that if you ask for a phone number, somebody says 555-1234, what do you typically do? You kind of repeat it to yourself, 555-1234. It's a little bit of a mnemonic device that helps you to remember a little bit better. And so same kind of way, saying things out loud tends to make you a little bit more accurate. But there's other areas where ROI comes into play. We can get people up to goal rate very fast, typically within a couple days. I have one customer that justifies renting voice equipment, and all this equipment is available as a monthly rental. But during their busy season, they bring in about 80 or 90 temps, typically around October. And they justify the cost of doing that, and that they can get those people up and to goal rate on voice much faster than they could on RF, and that alone pays for the rental of the equipment. We often eliminate things like RF spend, paper spend, label spends, printing. I mentioned this device doesn't have a screen or keyboard. That's typically the most common failure points on RF devices. If you think about an RF device, I'm doing a lot of this. I'm hitting function keys. I'm interacting with that keyboard typically quite a bit. With voice, I typically will hit one button to get started, put it on my hip, put it in the cup holder, put it wherever, and then I don't really touch it a whole lot for 8 hours. So it doesn't typically take the abuse that most RF devices take. Consequently, between time failure on this is pushing 6 years. And improved safety. Safety comes from a couple different things. Safety comes from heads up, eyes forward. Safety also comes from the elimination of repetitive use injuries. And so that combination is typically where ROI comes from, and we love to work with customers to try to figure out, does this make financial sense for you to do? It's a big part of what Barry and I do every day, is trying to determine, does this make sense? Lastly, employee satisfaction. And a couple customers have gone on record talking about their ability to retain employees, particularly in a tough, competitive environment, that their employees like picking with voice, particularly those who are in some type of incentive pay environment, because voice doesn't really force them to have to be a master at manipulating the RF device. It's very natural to listen, respond, and so their performance is dictated more about their effort than their ability to manipulate technology. So to sum all that up, what enables, I think, all of those things is on the bottom right there, the idea that we can have refined and consistent processes. We obsess a little bit on our side about one word in a voice dialogue, and that might sound a little bit silly, but if you think about a pick process and all the, over the course of 8 hours as you're picking, how you have to go through that dialogue flow time and time and time and time again. If I can eliminate one word out of that pick flow, and I can multiply that by however many pickers you have, by however many work days a year you have, just the elimination of one word can add up to a very big savings in productivity. So a little bit on some architecture. Who here in the room is more on the IT side of the business as opposed to operations? All right, this is for you. So. Glad to talk with anybody in detail about IT afterwards. I don't want to get too involved in it just because of time, but Barry and I will be available if you want to talk afterwards. In the HighJump world, particularly with Edge, we've built something that talks to or speaks directly to the Edge database. And so you basically have your mobile device, and your mobile device will hit a piece of software that says, all right, I'm ready for my next command. And then at that point, the software that you see down there in the bottom will go to the Edge database and get whatever that piece of information is. Perhaps it's the location, perhaps it's a pick quantity, whatever that happens to be. Feed that back to the device that converts that piece of information into a command to do something. And this communication goes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So the nice thing about that is that if you decide to upgrade Edge, or you decide to upgrade your HighJump host system, we're not touching the application layer, and so you can leave voice alone there. We do have a solution built around Android that's fairly new to the market, and historically we've needed about 10 or 12 pickers or above to drive an ROI. Now we're looking at getting down to that 5 or 6 picker range. Android allows us to get there. There's some technology differences, but for the most part, that slide up there still holds true, and the things that I spoke to are still happening on an Android solution. I understand there's some SAP users in the room. I think I spoke to some at lunch. And so there's different ways we can integrate with SAP, whether it's WM or EWM. And there's a direct interface that is available there that is certified by SAP. And we've deployed that with both WM and EWM users across North America. And so in that situation, if you're running ITS mobile with your RF handhelds, we can take the information off of those screens, and we actually use that HTML that drives those screens to run voice. And so what happens behind the scenes is we take that HTML, we convert it into something that's a voice-friendly format that, again, tells you to go location, pick a certain quantity, and so on. Once you respond, your voice is converted back into HTML, where we're essentially populating that screen behind the scenes. And that allows you to have a direct interface. Some differences as to where we put the software in the SAP landscape, which I won't get into just for time reasons, but glad to talk to you about it. And so typically with an SAP user, we suggest that you work with us. We'll help you kind of build out what those screens are if you don't already have them. And then we'll develop the voice application on our side. Many different ways we can integrate to any kind of a host system. And again, just for the sake of time, I won't go through this in great detail. We do have the ability to do what historically has been called middleware. And so this would be the idea that your host system hands off some orders to voice. We take over. So let's say that you wave a batch of orders. We can take that information, we can bring it into some voice software, we can manipulate that, send it out to the various pickers, and then we have some reports that you can run, dashboards. There's some labor light functionality built into the software as well that we can offer. There's different ways we can architect direct interfaces, so you don't have anything in between. You've got some type of a mobile device and you've got a host system, and that's it. We have the ability to pass information through in different kinds of ways. That's what this signifies. We have the ability to take RF screens, whether those RF screens are telnet or HTML and convert that data to voice as well. And then we've already talked about RF, and talked about SAP, and we have a few different ways that we can interface with SAP. It's a very busy slide. I could talk for 45 minutes alone on this slide. If anybody on the IT side wants to get in some discussion afterwards, come seek Barry and I out. Lastly, if you just choose to do this, what should you expect? If you can read that, you have very good eyesight. We do have an implementation methodology that we like to follow, and so that involves a design session in which we want to figure out, again, how can we optimize this voice dialogue with you. We'll then configure that based off of whatever we agree to in the design session. We'll come back a second time to do some setup and training, allow you to use it for a few weeks, and then come back a third time for the actual go live. Everybody that you work with on our side, from project managers, developers, they're all technical people. They can all write code, and they all understand the voice application very, very well. Again, glad to get into further detail afterwards on this if you'd like.
Merci à tout le monde.